Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am Brooke Walker, your host, and excited to be here today. I'm actually usually excited to be here. I like to make this as fun as possible with something that's a very difficult subject for me and most people that have grown up in something like I have. Last episode, we kind of talked specifically about how to not fall prey to new organizations after you've gotten out of the one that may have been hurtful to you. But we're going to get back to a little bit of the story today about my upbringing. And, we're kind of rounding to, I think, our 10th episode now. And I'm still only a few years in to the cult. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the day to day. I'm going to talk about how much it was really utter chaos, which I think is a tactic. I'm also going to talk about what was expected and things that kind of began to happen and how it really transformed me into who I started to become. Because these things are not these overnight processes. These are things that happen slowly over time. And I think it's really important that people understand that so they can begin to unravel perhaps what you've been through. And then on top of that, I'm going to talk about some books that I've read and some ways that I've worked on things that have been really healing for me. Because I think that because a little bit of what we're going to talk about today is how my health started, like the beginning of my health problems began. And I want to talk about how emotional stress causes physical stress. So emotional stress will eventually turn into physical stress. And you will actually have physical problems based on the emotional things that you've been through. So we're going to dive into that at the end. All right. So things were utter chaos. Like I shared on one of the previous episodes, people were moving because they would be told to move because of processes. So regardless of whether we stayed in the house, there would be different families that may move in and out with us. My parents had just found Kim, and then around the same time, Sage came in, which was the name that my mom changed Mary Kennedy's name to. And I probably will slip in and out of calling her Mary some of the time and slip in and out of calling her Sage. Sage was more what we knew her as, but I don't like to use that name. I like to use her given name by her actual parents. And that's because she doesn't like it. So that's specifically on purpose. Yes, I do my best to be a good person, but I have my moments too. So during that time, on a day-to-day basis, initially it was like the expectation was going to school every day. Somewhere in there, the school initially had been in Mesa, but they began to move it as people slowly began to kind of like migrate up towards outside of Payson. So as people are slowly beginning to move more up there, it makes sense for them to begin to move the school up to that area as well. I lived in the valley in Mesa, so as everybody's moving up to the mountains and the school begins to move, then there was this point where there kind of just wasn't school and we just kind of weren't going to school for a little while. Now, I don't think I personally missed a beat, but then the expectation was to clean and babysit. So I was I was 12. I was 12, not going to school, and part of this was over the summer, but it was still a lot longer than just a summer. And there was always reasons why any erratic behavior was made okay. Because the bigger picture was were we moving towards doing things that were in the best interest of the church? And if the answer to that was yes, then any and every transgression was allowable. So then it became me and Mary's job to clean and babysit every day for Marlo and Steve while they would either work or go process people. And we would spend hours at their house watching their children and cleaning their house from head to toe. And I mean, it was like full maid service. And I had been trained to clean for a long time. And so we would go in, and sometimes other places, but for the most part there. And then sometimes we still had to come home and clean at my house for my parents or for my mom to help her out, because my dad worked full time and my mom was, I mean, she still had young kids. She also was a midwife, which she did births for people in the church and also for anybody who needed it. So they had an entire business of it as well. So that was kind of how our days were when we didn't have school. If we were left to our own devices, we probably, got in trouble. I mean, I kind of shared some of the stuff we started doing. And specifically my generation, not my sister, not my older sister, so specifically my generation began to get labeled as being the troublesome generation. Like, we were the bad ones because we got in trouble more than the other ones. We also didn't have anything to take our time away. And all of our older sisters had horses. So they had hobbies and things that were fun for them. We had nothing. And there was never any resources to do anything. So there was either not the time, not the money, not the, so I didn't have things that I pursued because I didn't think there was an opening for me to be able to. So when my sister's out, riding horses and sometimes being in different things and doing Western stuff and all this kind of stuff, there was always this expectation that something was going to happen, and then it was always canceled on me. And it just was this. And then my brother was always in sports because he's younger than me. The message I regularly received was that the only thing I could do was to go with what I was told to do and do my best at that kind of stuff. And there was an enormous amount of fear too. Like, I don't know if I can fully explain the level of fear, because like I talked about the dynamics of living with groups of people. So you're living with different families, and at any given time, if there's something that somebody is aware of, they can bring it up to a process. And there's this expectation that you're supposed to be bringing up any grievances you have with anybody, or if you see something, you're supposed to do it. But there was also this hierarchy, so you better not cross the line of those kinds of hierarchy. And at the same time, if there was something you didn't tell, then there was this fear that this spirit would tell on you, because it was like this know-all that has this picture into your life. So if you weren't admitting something, then the spirit was going to tell on you. And there had been enough true things that had come from the spirit that there was a belief that he knew everything. Like I talked about when my parents were searching for Kim, that the daughter that they had given up for adoption, that he had told them to start searching for John Black. And when they did end up finding her, they found out that John Black was her grandfather. So there was this real belief in that. And then there was also this incredible amount of bullying that started occurring with me. And I started getting bullied. Now, I will say that the environment itself was very unkind. Like, just as children in a group together, there was a higher level of unkindness than you might find in other places because of the way that we lived. So instead of being some kind of church group that is promoting, loving God in a certain way, it's promoted with us in this, like, for you to be spiritual, you have to constantly tell the truth. And telling the truth means saying the ugly things that most people won't say. Because the only way we're going to have strong, connected relationships is if we say the things that other people won't say to each other. In theory, that sounds almost okay. In reality, it created this kind of underlying hurtfulness about how you could communicate with each other that was expected. And so if you weren't harsh some of the times, it's like you weren't telling the truth. So it just kept perpetuating this hurtfulness. And I don't know exactly when the bullying started with me, that I began getting bullied. I would say that I was more bullied than everybody else in my specific age group. I'd say I was the one that was the most targeted. I was a little bit heavy. And I wouldn't even really say that I was like real overweight. But it wasn't until we moved to Arizona for the first time that Jessica said something to me about my weight when I was a kid. And I can tell you, up until that time, I don't remember ever spending any time looking at myself or thinking about what I looked like. I felt very free as a kid in not even acknowledging that being a thing. I didn't have an interest in those kind of things yet in general. And then all of a sudden that happens. And then that became a regular thing with other kids in our generation, saying fat jokes and things to me at the time. So, and that went on forever through my teenage years. And when Mary Kennedy showed up, it got worse too, because her being able to come in and leverage this teasing of me gave her an in with everybody. So it was easy. And on top of that, there's this very huge lack of respect that I constantly felt. And it was perpetuated by the way that we lived as well. But it was this, other people lived in the house, you would share rooms with people. So there was no telling if somebody would take things that were yours, clothes, any kinds of belongings could just disappear and you would not find them again. And like I shared that moment of like people would just walk into your house if they were part of the church. So there was this open door policy, and it was, they would talk about it in processes. It was called, it was, you always enter. It's like you should always walk in and feel free to come in. There was never supposed to be any secrets. And whatever the ideal was of that, it created chaos. It created complete lack of security because you were surrounded by this baseline of like, you didn't know if you were going to get jerked around. People were mean to you and you had no way to defend yourself. It was almost an expectation that you were going to get regularly emotionally beaten down, either by the process and one of the ministers or teachers there, or by Duran himself, because there's times that he would tear people down as well. And you couldn't do something unless it was considered an avenue which was going to help the church. And so, I began to learn that going to school would only be something that I could do, like past getting a GED. Going to school is only something that would be allowed if it was something that was going to serve the purpose of the church. And meanwhile, there's lawsuits that have begun to, you know, come through, which I'm not going to get into the lawsuits too much today. I'm going to start talking about those a little bit more in the next episode, I think. Um, but you begin to just have this fear about it. And you also were expected to work because if you're over the age of 12, then that's what you did. So we had and there was a bunch of businesses, but one of the businesses that was going at the time would be at the Park and Swap in Phoenix. And they had a couple different ones, but one of them was Bagel King. And so they would sell bagels and muffins and stuff. So, because I enjoyed cooking, because it was one of the few things that I could, do that nobody had anything over, I would just grab a cookbook and make things sometimes from whatever ingredients we had in the house, which is usually limited because food was kind of limited. So they decided, it'd be a great idea for Brooke to go help start cooking for that, which meant that I would go with two of the men that would run that and cook for that right before the weekend. And we would go make all different kinds of food. We would make muffins mostly. So I would sit and just crack eggs. Like I learned how to double hand crack eggs into a big thing. And I mean, I believe I was 12 years old, and we would be there late at night till like midnight. And sometimes I had school the next day, sometimes I didn't, depending on what day they were doing it. And around then is when the migraines began. Now I've been a migraine girl since then. They've gone up and down. They definitely got worse over time. The other thing that also began sometime around that time was fainting. And there was multiple times that I remember being a young kid and fainting. And what would happen is all of a sudden, like my sight would begin to like go away. Like I would be standing there with my eyes open and it would all of a sudden feel like I was beginning to black out over my eyes. And then my hearing became very like acute, like I could like, and maybe it's because I couldn't see all of a sudden. And then I would just fall to the ground and pass out. So I think that the stress of the way that we began to live during that time is what began to create the huge physical toll that it began to have on me. And we didn't have an outlet. I had no outlet. I had all these expectations about what life ahead of me was going to look like. And in there as well, like there was the older generation above us they were beginning to slowly get into relationships, and watching the way that the relationships were consistently either put together or other couples, how they would get moved around and how they would get separated and then somebody else would get put together, all based on what Duran said or the ministers would say. I slowly began to see that I had to, and I was told this. I was blatantly told this, like, you will be put in the relationship that you're told to be in. And I mean, when we had moved to Arizona, one of the things that I remember very vividly is the first two kids that were born were told that they were going to be betrothed to each other. So this was the beginning of the relationships that were, we were being told that were going to be put together, right? And the only concept of betrothal I had was from watching cartoons as a kid. So I'm starting to understand that I have to live a certain life and do things based on this. And it was incredibly stressful without a lot of outlets. I'm also made acutely aware of my parents' relationships with their parents. My grandmother passed away. My mom's mom passed away around then. And it was incredibly difficult on my mom. But she also she had a fight with her dad sometime around that time. And then she was fighting with my dad's parents too. And I think a lot of that was perpetuated by the cult. And it created this other set of distance between, family that may have been helpful for what we were living in. And they were always kind. My dad's parents, my grandparents were always, kind and there for everybody. But there was definitely this wall that went up, and I started to see my grandparents as not being great people, because that was the message that was being delivered, is like that my grandparents were, the problem of why my parents were a problem. And there was, it was always put in the sense of the walkers, my dad being a walker, my parents being walkers, me being a walker. So it was like the walkers were bad people. So, and I personally took that on, along with all these other things that were surrounding me. It was like this just environment of just, learning very young to not like myself because of where I came from, because of how I looked. I began to have a fear of even wanting things. And it's interesting because I remember when I began to start to build a life that was exciting for me and want things again. And it was very difficult to open that back up, to open that ability to want things in my life, because I had put this door on the fact that if I wanted it, it was against what God wanted for me. Then what is that going to do? I don't want things that God doesn't want for me. So I'm going to address this one really quickly because this is really important. Because I hear crazy religious people say this kind of stuff all the time. God would not put this in your head, it doesn't have to be God. It could be your spiritual faith, let's say. God or your spiritual faith does not give you dreams and things that you want to pursue for you to not have those. Those are there for you to find the mountain you have to climb to make them happen. I absolutely 100% truly believe that. So if somebody is trying to sway you the other way, it's very likely that they have a reason why they don't want you to pursue that, and it makes them uncomfortable. And you don't have to honor that. That is not for you. That was for them. People don't have to believe in you. You get to pursue and love and go after everything you want in your heart's desires, not anybody else's. So fuck them. Okay? Anyway, but during that time, I began to really shut down. And I think that the migraines and the fainting were an indication of how stressed out I was. Not to mention the fact that I was smoking and drinking, and I was a child, but I had no outlet. The only thing I knew how to do was act out. I mean, I basically was like an adult. Except for emotionally, I wasn't on any level, but I mean, I was cleaning, I was cooking when I was told to, I was babysitting. I had no life. Where else was I supposed to go? I did not have some pursuits or dreams that I was excited about. I had no goals. And I look back and I think that was a huge deficit. And I think it was why I just went along with everything. And I was incredibly afraid. I was petrified of so many things because of the environment we were in and because of the chaos. And the chaos is a tactic. When you keep somebody in chaos and when you keep them under extreme stress, one of the things that happens is that you're consistently Making sure that they stay in fight or flight. And when somebody stays in fight or flight, they, okay, we're going to get into a little bit of medical stuff for a second. So fight or flight is like a switch. It can be turned on and it can be turned off. There's not really a midway point. But when you turn on fight or flight, it does several things in the body. Number one, it turns off your digestion. It turns off your reproductive system. It turns on your sweat glands so that you tend to sweat more. It increases your heart rate. It turns your brain off. Because fight or flight is one of those things that the main thing that you're supposed to do is you're supposed to run from the situation, fight from the situation, do whatever you have to do to get out of the situation, to save yourself from what's attacking you. But if this is happening in an environment that you're growing up in and that's turned on, you're literally not able to think because your brain is turned off. So let's just say, if you're trying to control people, making them afraid is a great way to keep them doing what you want them to do. Okay. And you will constantly be dropping stress hormones and cortisol because of that. So I really want people to understand that emotional stress leads to physical stress. If you are under emotional stress for long periods of time, that will turn into physical things. And there is a ton of research that backs this. You guys can look up all kinds of stuff. And this kind of leads into what I want to share with you guys, which is some of the books that I began to get into, that I began to use to educate myself so that I could learn how the body works, so that I could undo a lot of the physical damage and the emotional damage of what had happened to me. So a really good one that I love is James Lipton, Biology of Belief. And it's how the cell actually acts based on our emotions. And it gets very much into cellular biology. It might be a little more in depth than you want, but it's a good one. I just can't find my physical copy because I'm going to show you guys books that I've actually read. Carolyn Meese, Anatomy of the Spirit. So love her stuff. She talks about how our emotional stuff will turn into physical issues and how to reverse that. This is one I think I mentioned already, but this is really good. This was good for me to get a better perspective so I could work on forgiveness. And it's Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. If somebody who's been through the Holocaust and come out the other side of that can try to find some reason and purpose behind it, I think that you and I can too. Power versus Force. And this one's by David Hawkins. And this one's about muscle testing. This one's a fascinating book about how we resonate to different things. Love this book. Huge, huge for me. Two of these, I'm not necessarily saying go get them. I'm saying that when I went to school for psychology, that they were incredibly mind altering for me in a good way. Integral Health, The Path to Human Flourishing. Again, these are more school textbooky. This one, Consciousness and Healing. So I took an entire class just about the spiritual aspects of healing. So consciousness and healing. Again, these were like expected in school. If you know, I teach meditation. So this was an everyday Kundalini. I'm not saying that this is the best book for teaching meditation. I just found one that really resonated with me. So if that's something you want to learn because you want to see some of the different things that it can do for you, this was a great one for me, but there's so many out there. Like, just go to your local bookstore. Joe Dispenza, I love Joe Dispenza. This is another one that will change your mind about how your physical ailments are affected by your emotional state. And so this one's breaking the habit of being yourself. I love Becoming Supernatural. He also has You Are the Placebo. I think I have others of his, but I can't think of the name of them. So my suggestion is dive into being your own advocate. The best way that you're going to heal yourself is to become your own advocate into loving and understanding yourself and finding a way to make peace with what's happened. So hopefully that helps. Hope you guys have enjoyed today's episode. I'm finding that people are finding us at more and more places. I didn't even know that the podcast was. And so I would love it if you guys could leave me a 5-star review. Wherever it is that you're listening to it, whether that be Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts are the most common, but if you're listening to it somewhere else, please leave me one there. And I would also love it if you could share this. I'm really trying to get this out to more people, so that would be amazing. I hope you guys have a wonderful day and stay amazing. Bye-bye.